She had always been the broken one of the pack, the girl whose wolf died before it could live, the one who loved a warrior who saw her as nothing more than a shadow. For years, she believed she was reaching for something impossible, until the night she thought he would finally claim her under the moon. But the claiming did not come from the warrior. It came from his cousin, the scarred warden who had never spoken more than 3 words to anyone. The warden who had bled for her in silence, who had carried her broken wolf like a secret. But the warrior did not surrender. Now 2 bloodbound males are circling a woman the entire pack once pitied. And she still does not know the most devastating truth of all. The warden, the one who never wanted anyone, made a choice that fractured the entire pack hierarchy. Chapter 1. The charcoal moved across the paper in rough strokes, leaving marks Kessa knew she shouldn't be making. The training yard stretched before her, filled with the sounds of sparring wolves, snarls and laughter mixing with the thud of bodies hitting packed earth. But she barely heard it. Her grey eyes were fixed on the sketch forming under her hands, on the face she had drawn 100 times and would draw 100 more. Maybe if I could just show him. Maybe if he saw how I see him, he would understand. The thought was foolish. She knew it was foolish. But the heart had never listened to logic, and hers had been lost to Dane Korrell since she was 14 years old. Across the yard, masculine shouts rose in approval. The patrol wolves were running drills, and if she lifted her gaze, she could see the powerful forms moving in coordinated attacks. Men and women who had survived their first shift, who had earned their place in the Thornridge pack. Warriors who belonged. She did not. I hope that someday you see past the surface, Kessa wrote beneath the sketch, her hand shaking slightly. Past the smiles you give everyone, and notice that I'm the one who stays. I'm always here, always watching, always hoping for something that might never come. She bit her lip, tasting copper. 24 years old and still writing like a girl who believed in destiny bonds. But what else did she have? The notebook was the only place she could be honest. I know I'm not strong like the others. Not whole like them. I know my wolf is dead, and that makes me less in everyone's eyes, including yours. But this stupid, stubborn heart chose you anyway. Even knowing that loving you means accepting that I might never be enough. A shadow fell across the page before the voice came. Well, little Kessa's drawing again. Kessa looked up, and her stomach dropped. Myra stood there with 2 other patrol wolves, all 3 dressed in training leathers still damp with sweat. Myra was beautiful in a way that hurt. Platinum hair in a warrior's braid, ice blue eyes, a predator's smile. She had shifted at 15 and killed her first rogue at 16. Everything Kessa was not. It's private, Kessa said quietly, closing the notebook against her chest. Oh, but I think it's packed business, Myra said, stepping closer with that casual confidence Kessa had never possessed. Show me. No. Show me, Kessa. Not a request. Myra lunged forward and yanked the notebook from Kessa's grip, leather slipping through her fingers like water. Myra, give it back. But Myra was already opening it, her eyes scanning the words with cruel delight. The other 2 wolves moved closer, grinning like they were watching entertainment prepared just for them. I hope that someday you see past the surface. Myra read aloud, her voice dripping with false sweetness. I know I'm not strong like the others. Not whole like them. She looked up, her expression shifting to mock pity. Gods, Kessa, how pathetic can you be? Heat crawled up Kessa's neck, burning her cheeks, her throat, the roots of her copper-red hair. Give me my notebook, she managed, her voice strangled. Myra tilted her head, considering. You know Dane doesn't even know you exist, right? You're wolfless, dead inside. What would a warrior like him want with broken goods? The words landed like claws. Kessa reached out, hand trembling. Just give it back, please. Sure, Myra said brightly. Go get it. And she threw it. The notebook spun through the air, arcing high before landing in the dirt near the sparring circle where the patrol wolves still trained. Kessa felt the world stop. All eyes turned toward the small leather book lying in the dust. The patrol captain, a grizzled man with silver threading his dark hair, bent down and picked it up. He turned it over in his scarred hands, frowning. Whose is this? Kessa couldn't answer. Shame locked her throat, froze her lungs, made her invisible even though everyone was staring. Then a voice cut through the silence. It's mine. Not the captain's voice. His. Kessa's eyes snapped up and saw him. Gareth Korrell, the Warden of Thornridge. Tall, impossibly tall, with shoulders built for carrying impossible burdens. His dark hair was longer than regulation, falling past his jaw in waves he never bothered to tie back. His face was hard angles and old scars, the most prominent one cutting from his left temple down through his eyebrow, a pale line that spoke of violence survived. His eyes were amber, wolfish even in human form, and they revealed absolutely nothing. He stood at the edge of the training grounds with his arms crossed, watching the world the way he always did, as if everything that happened passed through his judgment before becoming real. He approached the captain with slow, deliberate steps and held out his hand. The man gave him the notebook without question. Gareth held it carefully, as if he already knew what it was. Then he turned. He walked straight toward Kessa. She couldn't move, couldn't breathe. His amber eyes found hers, and for one infinite moment, the entire yard vanished. He stopped in front of her and held out the notebook, offering it like a silent vow. "I think this belongs to you," he said, his voice low and rough, carrying something she couldn't name. Kessa took it with trembling hands, her fingers brushing his for a brief, unbearable second. His skin was warm, calloused, real. "Thank you," she whispered, barely able to lift her voice above the hammering of her heart. Gareth didn't answer. He simply held her gaze a moment longer, as if reading something she hadn't written. Then he turned and walked back toward the barracks, leaving Kessa standing there with her notebook pressed to her chest and her heart pounding so loudly she was certain everyone could hear it. Myra watched from across the yard, her smile gone. Kessa clutched the notebook tighter and walked away without looking back. That night, Kessa couldn't sleep. She lay on the narrow cot in the quarters she shared with her mother in the wing reserved for those who served the pack, staring at the rough wooden ceiling while the notebook rested beneath her pillow. The warden's intervention echoed in her mind, replayed and dissected detail by detail. The way he had walked toward her, the low voice, the gaze that seemed to see straight through her. Gareth was difficult to decipher. He was 29, yet carried a presence that felt ancient, as if he had lived entire lifetimes before this one. Kessa remembered him at 17, when his father, the previous warden, died defending the pack's northern border against a rogue incursion. She had been only 12 then, but the image stayed carved in her memory. A boy trying to look like a man, standing in the council hall with dry eyes and a clenched jaw while the entire pack waited to see if he would break. He didn't. 3 years later, when his mother died giving birth to a stillborn pup, a daughter who never drew breath, Gareth grieved alone. No one saw him cry, but everyone knew. And when he emerged from that loss, he came out different. Harder, more distant, more warden than boy. Kessa saw him sometimes in the corridors, during patrols, during council meetings where she delivered reports her mother organized. He was massive, absurdly tall, with muscles built not for show but for survival. His body was a map of scars, claws, teeth, blades. Evidence of a life spent protecting others. His hair fascinated her most, embarrassingly so. Dark brown, almost black, thick and heavy, falling to his shoulders in waves that always looked slightly wild. He never tied it back, never trimmed it, let it fall around his face like another part of him that refused control. He was devastating in a way that hurt, not because of the beauty itself, but because of the distance. Every woman in the pack had tried something with him. Every single one. Myra had been the most obvious, showing up to patrol meetings in strategically torn leathers and calculated smiles. Nothing. Gareth never looked, never yielded. It was as if he had built a wall around himself no one could climb. And then there was Dane. Kessa sighed, turning onto her side. Dane Korrell was different. Completely different. 5 years younger than Gareth. The warrior was 24 and seemed to have been born with an easier life. Where his cousin was ice, Dane was fire, charismatic, quick-witted, effortlessly charming. His face was young, symmetrical, blessed with the kind of looks that made people forget to think. His smile appeared so easily, confident and borderline arrogant, as if the world were a game and he knew every rule. His hair was the same dark brown as Gareth's but fell in softer waves, framing his face in a way that felt natural, reinforcing that air of someone who never had to try. His eyes were expressive, alert, always shining with intelligence or amusement, as if he were constantly one step ahead. His body was athletic and lean, more graceful than imposing, with a relaxed posture even in armor. He was handsome in a dangerous way, the kind that made people forget caution. Kessa knew that. She knew Dane entertained several she-wolves both inside and outside the pack. She knew he took nothing seriously. She knew it was foolish to feel what she felt. But the heart didn't listen. She had fallen for him at 16, when Dane helped her carry supplies from the trade caravan to her mother's quarters and told a joke that made her laugh until her sides ached. He had smiled, touched her shoulder lightly, and that was it. 8 years later, he still didn't know. Pathetic. Kessa shut her eyes tight, trying to push the thoughts away. She wasn't like Myra. She had no noble blood. She couldn't even shift, ashamed to her parents, both former elite guards. Her father had died serving as second to the previous warden, Gareth's father. A man Gareth had watched fall in battle. The old warden had made a promise before he died, that his widow and daughter would always have a place in the pack. That was why Kessa was here. Out of charity, out of honor to her father. She lived with her mother in the smallest quarters, far from the warriors, close to the servants. She had gone through the shifting trials like every other youth, had trained, had waited for the transformation that marked adulthood. She waited at 15, 16, 17. Nothing. At 18, the pack healer examined her and delivered the devastating truth. Kessa's wolf had formed but died in utero, a rare condition that left her human but with a ghost of lupine instinct. She would never shift, never run on 4 legs, never fully belong. The pack assigned her to administrative duties, records, supplies, organization. Important work, but invisible work. Safe. Meanwhile, the others transformed, fought, thrived. Kessa was 24 and could barely hold a blade without shaking. Broken. The word echoed every time Myra or the others looked at her. Kessa buried her face in the pillow, feeling the weight of shame tighten around her chest. On the other side of the compound, Gareth sat in the office that once belonged to his father, surrounded by maps and reports that should have held his full attention. But his mind was in the training yard. With her. Gareth rubbed a hand over his face, feeling exhaustion settle into his bones. He shouldn't be thinking about Kessa. He shouldn't be thinking about how she had stood there, vulnerable and exposed, clutching that damned notebook as if it were the only thing that mattered. He shouldn't remember her wide grey eyes, the way she whispered thank you with a voice that sounded like it might shatter. But he did. He remembered everything. Kessa had grown up in the pack, a constant, almost invisible presence. He saw her sometimes carrying documents, helping her mother, sitting alone in the gardens with that distant look, as if lost in thoughts no one else could hear. Her hair looked like fire, long to her waist, waves catching copper and gold under the light. She was beautiful, painfully beautiful, and she had no idea. Gareth knew because he saw how she moved through the compound, shoulders curved slightly inward, as if trying to occupy less space, as if she believed she was less than she was. The other wolves treated her poorly, and Kessa let it happen. She didn't fight back. It irritated him more than it should. She's not my responsibility. But she was. Technically, she was. Gareth had made a promise to her father. Not directly. He had been too young, only 17 when the man died. But he had been there when his own father held the second's hand and heard his final words. Take care of them. My wife. My daughter. Please. Gareth's father had promised. Had given the widow and child a safe place in the pack. And when Gareth inherited the warden's mantle, he inherited that promise too. So yes, technically, Kessa was his responsibility. Nothing more. Gareth leaned back in his chair and closed his eyes. Nothing more. But the way his heart had pounded when he saw her notebook fall near the guards. When he saw Myra smiling with calculated cruelty. When he realized Kessa was about to be humiliated in front of everyone. That wasn't just responsibility. Gareth opened his eyes, staring into nothing. He couldn't feel this. He shouldn't. He had a pack to protect. Real threats to face. Decisions that affected hundreds. He had no time and no right to think about a woman who couldn't even shift, who was probably in love with his own cousin, who would never look at him twice. Let it go. Chapter 2. She didn't see Dane again that day, nor the next. And when she finally did, 3 days later, it was because Myra and the other wolves found her in the corridor near the supply rooms. Kessa, Myra called, her voice oddly friendly. Kessa stopped, suspicious. Since the incident in the training yard, the wolves had kept their distance. Seeing Myra smiling now was unsettling. What do you want? Nothing. Myra tilted her head, her platinum hair catching the torchlight. Actually, I came to bring you news. Kessa waited, tense. Warrior Dane asked to meet you. Kessa's heart jumped. It shouldn't have, but it did. What? He wants to claim you, Myra said, as if stating something trivial. Tonight, right here in the corridor. But it has to be a surprise. You know? He wants it to feel fated. That's why he asked you to wear this. She held out a strip of black cloth. Kessa stared at the fabric, confused. A blindfold, one of the other wolves explained, smiling. To cover your eyes so you won't see him arrive. He wants it to be unexpected. Romantic. Kessa took the cloth, feeling the weight of the silk between her fingers. It didn't make sense. Dane wasn't the type to plan romantic gestures. But at the same time, what if it were true? After all these years, what if he had finally noticed her? Stupid. The voice in her head sounded like Myra's. When? Kessa heard herself ask. At moonrise, Myra said. Put on the blindfold and wait. He'll come. Before Kessa could question anything, the wolves were already walking away, laughing softly, leaving her alone in the corridor with a black cloth and a heart beating far too fast. The moon was rising when Kessa returned to the corridor. Shadows stretched across the stone walls, and the entire compound seemed to sink into silence. She stood there with the cloth in her hands, feeling ridiculous. He's not coming. Logic spoke clearly, firm, merciless. You're being tricked. But her heart refused to listen. Kessa tied the cloth over her eyes, letting the darkness swallow her. The world vanished, leaving only her breath and the chill of stone beneath her bare feet. 5 minutes. 10. 15. Nothing. 20 minutes. Stupid. So stupid. Then she heard footsteps. Slow, steady, approaching. Her heart lurched. She straightened, nerves crawling up her throat like a wave. Is it you? She whispered, barely audible. Silence. But she felt it. Felt the presence close, real, filling the space in front of her. The heat. The scent of pine and steel and something wild without a name. Kessa rose onto her toes, heart hammering, and met his lips. The kiss was unexpected. It wasn't soft. It wasn't gentle. It was firm, deep, urgent, as if he had waited for it just as long as she had. His lips moved against hers with an intensity that stole her breath. One of his hands found her waist, pulling her closer, and Kessa felt her knees weaken. Dane. His name echoed in her mind, but something felt wrong. Off. The kiss was different from how she imagined, much more intense, more consuming. His hand was larger, rougher. The way he held her felt protective. Possessive in a way Dane had never been with anyone. And then, just as suddenly as it began, it ended. He pulled away, and Kessa heard his footsteps retreating, quick and strong, disappearing down the corridor. She tore off the blindfold, blinking into the dimness. The corridor was empty. Kessa turned, searching, but there was no one. Only shadows and silence. Dane. It had been him. It had to be. Who else could it be? Kessa touched her lips, still feeling the warmth, the pressure, the taste. Her heart pounded so hard it hurt. For the first time in her life, she had been kissed, and it had been perfect. On the other end of the corridor, hidden in the shadow of a stone archway, Gareth watched. His jaw was tight, fists clenched at his sides. He had seen Kessa standing there, blindfolded, vulnerable, waiting. He had seen and hadn't been able to walk away. Idiot. He had approached, stopped in front of her, and when she whispered, "Is it you?" something inside him shattered. Because he knew she wasn't expecting him. If only she knew she deserves better than him. The thought came unbidden, raw, too honest. If only I could show her. And then she had leaned up to kiss him. Gareth should have pulled back. Should have said something. Should have done anything other than what he did. But he kissed her. And now, watching her disappear down the corridor with her fingertips on her lips and her eyes glowing with hope, Gareth knew he had made the most dangerous mistake of his life. Because Kessa believed she had kissed Dane. And Gareth had no idea how to tell her the truth without destroying everything. Chapter 3. The next 3 days passed in a strange haze. Kessa found herself searching for Dane in every corridor, every room, in the training yard, in the mess hall. She searched without looking like she was searching, her heart racing every time she caught a glimpse of dark hair or heard a masculine laugh that might be his. But Dane never appeared alone. Always surrounded by patrol wolves or other she-wolves, always in motion, always out of reach. Until, on the afternoon of the 3rd day, she finally found him. She was returning from the archives with a stack of territory maps her mother had requested when she saw him in the corridor near the main staircase. Alone. Finally alone. Adjusting the strap on his weapon's harness as if preparing to go on patrol. Kessa's heart stumbled. She stopped, the maps pressed against her chest, unsure of what to do. Call out. Wait. Pretend she hadn't seen him and walk past the way she always did. But then Dane lifted his eyes and saw her. And he smiled. It wasn't the casual smile he tossed at everyone. It was different. Slower. More focused. As if he were actually seeing her. "Kessa," he said, his voice carrying that relaxed tone that made her feel as if they were sharing a secret. "Haven't seen you around much lately." A lie. She saw him every day. But never like this. Never with his full attention on her. "I was in the archives," Kessa managed, feeling heat climb up her neck. Dane walked toward her, hands loose at his sides, posture laid back yet eyes alert, scanning her face with a curiosity that hadn't been there before. "Always working," he said, tilting his head slightly. "Do you ever take a break? Someone has to keep records organized." He laughed softly, and the sound went straight to her stomach. "That's true," Dane agreed. And suddenly, he was closer. Too close. "You know, I've been thinking about you lately." The world tilted. "Thinking about me?" "Yes." Dane held her gaze, and there was something there. Something that felt real, intense. "I don't think I've given you the attention you deserve." Kessa couldn't respond. Her throat had closed, her heart pounding so loudly it drowned out any coherent thought. It was him. He was the one who kissed me. And now he's here, finally here, seeing me. Dane reached out and brushed her arm, just for a second, but it was enough to make her skin tingle. "We need to talk more," he said, his voice low, almost intimate. "Whenever you have time. Just the two of us." And before Kessa could process anything, before she could say a single word, he was already moving away, throwing one last smile over his shoulder before disappearing down the stairs. Kessa stayed frozen in place. "He thought about me. He wants to talk. Just the two of us." For the first time in 8 years, Dane had noticed her. For real. And it felt like the beginning of something she had waited for her entire life. From the top of the staircase, Gareth saw everything. He saw his cousin's smile. He saw the way Dane moved toward Kessa, calculated, charming, wielding that effortless allure that always worked. He saw the touch on her arm. He saw the way Kessa remained there afterward, eyes glowing, cheeks flushed, as if she'd just been handed a divine promise. And something deep and heavy coiled tight in his chest. "It's none of your business." But it felt like it was. Every bit of it felt like it was. Gareth descended the stairs with silent steps, walking past Kessa without looking at her, without saying a word, because if he opened his mouth now, he wasn't sure what would come out. He went straight to the training yard where the patrol was practicing hand-to-hand combat. "Anyone want to spar with me?" he asked, his voice harsher than he intended. The warriors exchanged looks. When the warden asked to train, it usually meant someone was going to bleed. One of the largest among them, a man named Roan who almost never lost, stepped forward. "I'll do it, Warden." Gareth didn't reply. He simply removed his coat, left in a loose tunic and leather trousers, and stepped into the sand circle. The fight lasted less than 2 minutes. Gareth held nothing back. He attacked with a ferocity that made the others step away. Every movement brutal, precise, giving no room for defense. Roan tried to counter, but every hit was blocked and returned with twice the force. Gareth took him down 3 times. On the third, Roan stayed on the ground, gasping, blood on his lip. "Get up," Gareth ordered. "Warden, I." "Get up." Roan obeyed, staggering. But before he could get back into position, Gareth turned and walked out of the circle, leaving everyone in stunned silence. The patrol captain approached cautiously. "Warden, if I may ask, did something happen?" Gareth picked up his coat, wiping sweat from his face. "No," he lied. "Just needed to train." And he left before anyone else could question him. That night, during the evening meal in the Great Hall, Kessa couldn't eat. She sat at the farthest table with her mother and a few other compound workers, pushing food around her plate while her eyes kept straying toward Dane at the high table. He was there beside his cousin, laughing at something one of the patrol leaders said, completely relaxed, completely handsome. And then, as if sensing her stare, Dane turned his head. Their eyes met. He smiled. Not a big smile. Just a small curve of the lips. But it came with a look that lasted a second longer than it should have. Kessa tore her gaze away, heart racing, cheeks burning. "You all right, sweetheart?" her mother asked softly beside her. "I'm fine," Kessa whispered, still unable to look up. But she wasn't fine. She was unraveling and rebuilding herself at the same time. Every interaction with Dane undoing years of resignation and stitching something new, something dangerously close to hope. At the high table, Gareth sat in the main chair, his plate untouched, watching the scene with an expression that revealed nothing. He saw Dane's smile. He saw Kessa's reaction. And he felt his fingers tighten around the wooden cup. His going to hurt her. The certainty was absolute. Dane didn't love Kessa. To him, this was just another conquest, another pretty woman who looked at him with adoration. He would play with her feelings until he grew bored, until someone else caught his attention. Then he would discard Kessa the way he discarded every other, and she would break. Over the next days, Dane began appearing more often. Not obviously, but enough for Kessa to notice. He found her in corridors, always with a casual comment that made her laugh. Showed up in the archives while she sorted records, offering help she didn't need but accepted just to keep him near. Once he brought her wildflowers from outside the compound walls and handed them to her with a mischievous smile, saying he'd thought of her when he saw them. Kessa kept the flowers as if they were made of gold. And Dane knew exactly what he was doing. He'd noticed the way she looked at him now, the way her eyes lit up whenever he appeared, how her breath caught when he stood too close. It was pure adoration. No games, no masks. And it was pleasant. Easy. Different from the other she-wolves who demanded constant attention, promises, more than he ever intended to give. Kessa didn't demand anything. She simply looked at him as if he were the best thing that had ever happened to her. And Dane liked that. It wasn't love. Not even close. But it was comfortable. Good for his ego. And Kessa was beautiful in a quiet way, delicate, nothing like the obvious, showy beauty of the others. There was something about her that intrigued him, a fragility mixed with an inner strength he couldn't fully decipher. So he kept feeding her attention, kept smiling, kept making her believe that maybe, just maybe, he was starting to feel something too. And he never corrected the misunderstanding, because the truth was far too convenient. Gareth, on the other hand, was reaching his limit. He saw everything. Saw Dane circling Kessa like a patient predator. Saw the way she glowed in his presence. Saw his cousin tossing crumbs of attention while she gathered them like feasts. And he couldn't stay silent anymore. On a grey afternoon, he found Kessa alone in the small garden near the herb beds already wilting with the coming cold. She sat on the stone bench with an open book on her lap, eyes lost somewhere far away. Gareth stopped a few steps away, hands clasped behind his back, watching her for a moment before speaking. Kessa. She startled, almost dropping the book, and turned to him wide-eyed. Warden. Kessa stood quickly, offering a rushed bow. I didn't know you were here. Sit, Gareth said, his voice softer than he intended. She obeyed, tense, while he moved closer and stood beside the bench, looking at the herbs instead of her. I need to talk to you, he began, choosing his words carefully. Kessa waited, hands fidgeting in her lap. It's about my cousin. Her body stiffened instantly. Dane. What about him? Gareth finally looked down, meeting her grey eyes. You've been spending a lot of time with him. It wasn't a question. It was an observation, heavy with something Gareth tried to hide. Kessa frowned, her defenses rising immediately. And that's a problem. It can be. Why? Gareth rubbed his face, fighting the frustration threatening to burst. Because I know my cousin, Kessa. I know him better than you do, and I know how he is with women. Her cheeks flushed. Not with shyness. With anger. With all due respect, Warden, that's none of your business. It is. Gareth shot back, harder than he meant. When it involves someone under my protection, it is my business. Protection. Kessa let out a short, humorless laugh. I didn't ask to be protected. And I'm not a child who needs supervision. It's not about that. Gareth stepped closer, and the air between them thickened. It's about the fact that Dane doesn't know how to tell attention from affection. He likes being admired, likes having someone look at him as if he's special, but he doesn't know how to love. Not yet. And when he gets bored, he leaves. The words came out with more emotion than Gareth had permission to feel. Kessa stood, facing him, her eyes shining with a mix of hurt and fury. Why do you care? She asked, her voice shaking. Why does it matter so much to you? Because I can't stand the thought of you looking at him that way and then crying. Because it hurts. The thoughts rose sharp, brutal, too honest. But Gareth couldn't say that. Had no right. Because I made a promise, he said, his voice rough. To your father. Before he died, he asked, He asked my father to take care of you and your mother. And when my father died, that responsibility became mine. I promised you'd be safe, that no one would hurt you, that I'd protect you from any threat, even if it was my own cousin." Kessa stared at him, processing the words. There was truth there. Gareth could see she believed it. "A promise," she repeated, voice lower now. "Yes. So that's all it is. Responsibility." "No." The no screamed inside him. "Yes," Gareth lied. Kessa stepped back, putting distance between them, and something in her expression shifted. Closed off, colder. "Thank you for your concern, Warden," she said, formal, distant. "But I can take care of myself. And I don't need anyone deciding for me who I should or shouldn't spend time with." And before Gareth could reply, she was already leaving the garden, walking away, leaving him alone with the sound of the wind beginning to pick up. Gareth closed his eyes, frustration burning in his throat. Stupid. He had tried to protect her and had only pushed her further toward his cousin. Over the next days, Kessa avoided Gareth. Not obviously, but every time she saw him in the corridors, she turned away. When he entered a room, she found an excuse to leave. During meals, she kept her eyes on her plate, refusing to glance at the high table. And Dane noticed. He noticed something had happened between Kessa and his cousin. Noticed how she clung even more to his attention now, as if trying to prove something. And Dane, being Dane, took full advantage. He stayed closer, more present, touched her shoulder more often, whispered things in her ear that made her laugh, went out of his way to find her when Gareth was around, just to see his cousin's reaction. And the reaction was always the same. The tight jaw, the clenched fists, the stare that could turn someone to ash. But Gareth said nothing. He couldn't. Not without revealing something he himself didn't want to admit. It was late one night when Kessa ran into Gareth in the corridor near the archives. She was returning to her quarters with a candle in hand, far too late to be awake, but sleep wouldn't come. Then she saw him stepping out of the records room with a scroll under his arm, his hair damp as if he had just bathed, his tunic open at the chest, revealing scarred skin and defined muscles. They stopped at the same time. The corridor was empty, silent, only the faint torch light along the walls and her candle creating flickering shadows. "Kessa," Gareth said, his voice low. "Warden." He stepped toward her, and Kessa felt her heart race without permission. "You're avoiding me," he said. "Not a question." "I am," she admitted, lifting her chin. "I thought it was for the best after our conversation." Gareth stopped just a few steps away. "Too close. I didn't mean to offend you." "But you did." The words escaped before she could stop them. "Warden, you have no right. You have no right to decide what's best for me. You don't know me. You don't know what I feel. And you can't just show up and tell me I'm wrong for liking someone." Her voice trembled at the end, betraying more emotion than she intended. Gareth closed his eyes for a moment, jaw tight. "I know," he said, opening them again. And there was something raw there, something vulnerable. "I know I have no right, but I can't. I can't stay silent and watch you get hurt." "How do you know I'll get hurt?" "Because I know my cousin." He paused. "And because?" He stopped, the words dying in his throat. "Because what?" Kessa pressed, stepping closer, the candle trembling in her hand. Gareth looked at her, really looked. And for a moment, Kessa saw everything he was trying to hide. The inner battle, the conflict, the desire he refused to name. "Because you deserve more," Gareth finally said, his voice breaking slightly. "You deserve someone who chooses you. Someone who doesn't play with your feelings." The air between them thickened. Kessa felt her breath catch. "And you think Dane can't be that person?" "I know he can't. Because that person should be me." But Gareth didn't say that. He couldn't. So he simply held her gaze, letting the silence speak for him. And then, because staying was becoming unbearable, he turned and walked away, leaving Kessa alone in the corridor with a candle trembling as much as her hands. Myra watched everything from afar. She had seen the way the warden looked at Kessa. She had seen the attention Dane gave her. And she felt jealousy burn like acid. What does she have that I don't? Myra had tried with Gareth. She had done everything right. She dressed well, fought well, showed strength and beauty, everything a warden should want in a mate. But he never looked, never bent. And now he was looking at Kessa, at the girl who couldn't even shift. And Dane was giving her attention too, after giving Myra attention for weeks, making her believe something might happen. But now he only had eyes for Kessa. And Myra wasn't going to accept that. She turned to the two wolves accompanying her, a cold smile curving her lips. "I think it's time we teach Kessa a lesson," she said, her voice low and venomous. "A lesson she'll never forget." The other two exchanged looks, understanding perfectly. Chapter 4. That cold morning, Kessa was in the compound gardens, helping her mother gather the last medicinal roots before the frost, when she saw Myra approaching. Alone, for the first time in weeks, without the other wolves, without the cruel smile. Just a neutral expression, almost tired. Kessa straightened, tense, bracing herself for a verbal attack. But it didn't come. "Kessa." Myra stopped a few steps away, hands clasped in front of her body. "May I speak with you?" "Speak." Kessa couldn't hide her suspicion. "Yes. Alone. Please, just hear me out." There was something different in her tone. Something that almost sounded like remorse. Kessa's mother shot her a warning look, but Kessa gave a small shake of her head. "It's fine, Mother. I'll be right back." Myra turned and began to walk, and Kessa followed, keeping her distance. They crossed the main gardens, past the stables, and followed the stone path that led to the gorge cutting through the pack lands. The water ran fast there, swollen by recent rains, its constant roar muffling any other sound. When they reached the cliff edge, Myra finally stopped and turned. "I know I was horrible to you," she began, and her voice sounded sincere. "I know I treated you badly, that I was cruel, and I wanted to apologize." Kessa blinked, too surprised to respond right away. "Apologize?" "Yes." Myra lowered her eyes, looking genuinely ashamed. "I was jealous of you. Of the way people look at you. The way the Warden treats you. It's not an excuse, I know, but it's the truth." Kessa didn't know what to say. She hadn't expected this. Hadn't expected Myra to be capable of admitting something like that. I don't want any of that," Kessa murmured. "I don't want attention. I don't want enemies. I just want to live in peace." "I know," Myra finished, offering a faint smile. "And you deserve that. That's why I wanted to talk. To clear the air. So we can. I don't know, start over." She held out her hand. Kessa looked at the outstretched hand, feeling relief begin to loosen the tension in her shoulders. Maybe things could get better. Maybe Myra was being sincere. She reached out to take her hand. And that was when she felt the shove. Hard. Brutal. From behind. Kessa didn't even have time to scream before she fell. Her body twisting in midair, arms flailing for something that wasn't there. The gorge swallowed her in an icy shock that ripped all the air from her lungs. Cold. So cold it burned. Kessa fought to rise, to reach the surface, but the current dragged her under, strong and relentless. She managed to lift her head for a single second, just long enough to see the three wolves on the cliff edge. Myra in the center, the other two beside her, all watching. "This is a lesson, Kessa," Myra shouted over the roar of the water. "So you learn where you belong." And then Kessa was pulled under again, the current carrying her downstream. Water flooded her mouth and nose, burning. She tried to swim, tried to fight, but her strength was fading. The cold was stealing her movements, making her limbs heavy, useless. She struck rocks. Pain exploded through her shoulder, her ribs. She swallowed more water. "I'm going to die. I'm going to die here." The thought came, clear and terrifying. And then, somewhere deep in her mind, a voice screamed. "Fight. Don't give up. Fight." Kessa tried with everything she had left. But the gorge was stronger. It always had been. Gareth was in the council chamber when he felt it. It wasn't a thought. It wasn't logic. It was pure instinct, slicing through him like a blade. Danger. He stood so abruptly that his chair crashed backward. "Warden." One of the councillors began, but Gareth was already gone, ignoring protests, questions, everything. He ran through the corridors, heart pounding, following something he couldn't explain. Scent. Lupine instinct. Something was wrong. Something was terribly wrong. Kessa. Her name exploded in his mind with absolute certainty. Gareth burst out of the compound, crossed the gardens, followed a scent only he could track, an invisible trail pulling him forward. And when he reached the gorge, when he saw the three wolves standing on the cliff edge, staring at the water, when he saw copper-red hair disappearing and reappearing farther downstream, the world stopped. Then he was running again. Faster. drawing his blade only to fling it onto the grass, kicking off his boots without slowing. Gareth dove into the gorge without hesitation. The icy shock meant nothing. And he swam. He swam with brutal strength, cutting through the current, muscles burning, focus absolute. He reached Kessa just as she was slipping beneath the surface, her eyes closed, her body limp. Gareth grabbed her, pulling her against his chest, and fought to get her back to the bank. The water resisted, tugged, tried to tear her from his grip. But Gareth was stronger. He always had been. He held her as if his own life depended on it and swam until his feet found purchase, until he could stand, until he finally collapsed onto the grass with Kessa in his arms. She wasn't breathing. The terror that slammed into Gareth was so intense it nearly paralyzed him. He rolled her onto her side, struck her back, and Kessa coughed. Water spilled from her mouth and nose, and she coughed again, her body convulsing as she fought to expel the gorge from her lungs. Kessa. Gareth cradled her face, brushing wet hair from her skin. Kessa, look at me. Look at me. She opened her eyes, grey and disoriented, and saw him. Gareth, she rasped, her voice broken. I'm here, he said, his voice trembling. I'm here. You're safe. You're with me. Kessa began to shake. Not just from the cold, but from shock. Gareth pulled her into him, wrapping her completely, trying to warm her with his own body. She was freezing, so cold it terrified him. Don't let go of me, Kessa murmured against his chest, her hands clutching his soaked tunic. Please don't let go. Never, Gareth promised. And it was the rawest truth he had ever spoken. I will never let go of you. And then, because the fear was still too fresh, because the image of her sinking still burned behind his eyes, because the relief of holding her alive was too much to contain, Gareth did what he shouldn't have done. He kissed her. It wasn't planned. It wasn't thought through. It was pure instinct. His lips met hers, cold and wet, but alive. So alive. The kiss was desperate, urgent, as if he needed to prove she was there, that she was breathing, that she was safe. His hands framed her face, fingers tangling in her drenched hair. And Gareth kissed her as if it were the last thing he would ever do. And Kessa felt it. Everything. The firmness of his lips. The urgency. The way his hands trembled slightly as they held her face. The taste of river water and desperation and something deeper, unnamed. This kiss. The memory exploded. The corridor. The black cloth. The waiting. The footsteps. The question, is it you? This kiss. It was the same. Exactly the same. It wasn't Dane. It never had been. It had always been Gareth. Kessa pulled away sharply, eyes wide, breath caught. Gareth froze. The entire world froze. Kessa, I'm sorry. I acted on instinct. Kessa stayed silent. The words wouldn't come. She didn't know what to say, and simply nodded. Gareth stood, stepping back, creating distance. What happened? He asked, his voice shifting, hardening. Why were you in the gorge? How did you fall? Kessa blinked, returning to the present, to the cold, to the pain in her body. Myra, she said, her voice trembling. She asked to talk, said she wanted to apologize, brought me here, and then someone pushed me. The change in Gareth was instant. His expression closed completely, becoming something dangerous, lethal. His eyes darkened almost to black, his jaw locked. And Kessa saw, truly saw, the alpha behind the Warden for the first time. Not the civilized man who ruled with strategy and discipline, but the wolf who would kill to protect what was his. They tried to drown you. It wasn't a question. I think they just wanted to scare me. Teach me a lesson. They almost killed you. The fury in his voice was tangible. Gareth turned, looking upstream where the wolves were likely still nearby. Kessa saw his muscles tense, saw the decision harden in his amber eyes. Gareth, she began, but he was already moving. He retrieved the blade he'd thrown onto the grass, pulled on his boots. Then he turned back to her, his expression softening only when his gaze landed on Kessa. Stay here, he ordered, concern beneath the command. Don't move. I'll be back. Before she could protest, he was already climbing the bank. Myra and the other two were still near the gorge when Gareth arrived. They turned at the sound of footsteps, and Myra's smile died instantly when she saw him. The Warden was soaked, dark hair dripping, tunic plastered to his body, and something in the way he moved made their survival instincts scream. Warden, Myra tried, her voice sharper than she meant. We were only Silence. Gareth cut in, the word ablade. He stopped in front of them, and all three stepped back instinctively. You pushed Kessa into the gorge. It wasn't a question. It was an accusation. It was just a joke. One of the others tried. We didn't mean. You nearly killed her. The silence that followed was absolute. Gareth looked at each of them slowly, and when he spoke again, his voice was low, controlled, more terrifying than any shout. You will return to the compound. You will go straight to your quarters. You will wait for my orders. You will speak to no one. You will not leave. You will do absolutely nothing except wait. Do you understand? All three nodded, mute with fear. And if you try to flee, if you try to hide what you did, if you try to place the blame on someone else. Gareth stepped closer, his presence crushing. I promise you will wish I had been more merciful. He didn't need to say anything else. The wolves ran. In the days that followed, the entire pack felt the shift. Gareth summoned Myra and the other two for a private audience. No shouting. No witnesses. No one knew exactly what was said, but when they emerged, all three were pale and shaking. The punishments were announced publicly. Myra and the others were temporarily removed from the patrol. Not expelled, but demoted, reassigned to supply duties, far from elite training, far from the compound's inner circles. They lost access to warrior quarters and were moved to simpler accommodations. They lost the privilege of attending pack gatherings, councils, and hunts. For wolves accustomed to status, respect, and social power, it was a brutal fall. And Gareth made it unmistakably clear in a short but devastating declaration in the main hall. Anyone who touches Kessa again, by word, by action, or even by look, will answer directly to me, and there will be no second chance. The hall fell into deadly silence. The message was received. From that moment on, Kessa was no longer an easy target. Not because she had suddenly become strong, but because she had been chosen to be protected by the Warden, by the Alpha, and no one was foolish enough to challenge that. Kessa spent the following days in a strange state of confusion. She had survived. She was safe. But everything she thought she knew about herself, about what she felt, had been shattered and rebuilt into something new. It was never Dane. Every time the thought returned, Kessa felt the ground vanish a little more beneath her feet. She began to distance herself from him. Not dramatically, but in small ways. When Dane sought her out in the corridors, she made excuses. When he brought her flowers, she thanked him but no longer kept them. When he tried to talk, she kept her answers brief, polite, distant. And Dane noticed. For the first time in his life, he realized he was losing something. And he didn't like it. He was used to being the center, used to getting attention whenever he wanted, used to being desired, admired, chosen. But now, Kessa looked at him differently, as if she were seeing through him. As if everything she once felt had evaporated. And worse, she was looking at his cousin. Dane saw it. Saw how Kessa searched for Gareth with her eyes during meals. Saw how she tensed whenever the Warden entered a room. Saw the way they avoided being alone together, as if afraid of what might happen. And for the first time, Dane felt real jealousy. Dane decided to confront Kessa. He found her in the garden alone, sitting on the same bench she often used, staring at herbs now completely wilted by the cold. She was so lost in thought she didn't hear his steps. Kessa. She turned, and Dane was there, closer than she expected. Something was different about him today. Something tense. His eyes lacked their usual playful shine. Dane. She stood instinctively, creating distance. I was just leaving. No. He stepped forward when she tried to pass. You're not. Not before we talk. I need to go. No. Dane moved closer, and Kessa felt her back hit the bench. There was no way to go. You're avoiding me. You're different. Dane, please. You still like me, he said. And it wasn't a question. It was a declaration, fueled by the certainty of someone who had never been rejected. I know you do. You always have. Everyone knows. Things have changed. And on impulse, Dane leaned in to kiss her. No. Kessa turned her face away, pushing against his chest. No. Stop. But he didn't. Kessa, stop fighting this. His voice dropped. Persuasive. Dangerous. You want me. You always have. You just need to stop thinking and feel. He tried again, hands rising to grip her face, forcing her to look at him. Kessa pushed harder, heart racing. Not with desire, but fear. I said no, she managed, her voice shaking. Dane, let me go. Please. Why are you doing this? Frustration edged his voice now. Why are you being difficult? You always looked at me like I was everything. And now that I finally see you, now that I want you, you pull away. Because I don't want you. The words came out hard. Honest. Just let me go. Please. But Dane didn't let go. He was too used to getting what he wanted, too used to being desired. And wounded pride turned into dangerous stubbornness. He tried to kiss her again, this time more forcefully, leaning in, holding her in place. Panic exploded inside Kessa. She tried to push him away, tried to twist free, but she was trapped between him and the bench. And Dane was stronger. And she didn't know how to stop him without screaming, without causing a scene that would destroy everything. And then he was gone. It happened so fast Kessa barely saw it. One moment, Dane was looming over her. The next, he was flying backward, yanked away by hands she recognized. Gareth. The Warden was there, eyes blazing with fury, jaw locked, and something wild in him Kessa had never seen before. This wasn't the civilized man who ruled with strategy. This was the wolf. The alpha. Pure and lethal. Get away from her, he growled, his voice low and rough, vibrating with barely restrained violence. Dane stumbled, catching his balance, looking genuinely shocked for a second. Then pride surged back, and he straightened. This is none of your business, cousin. None of my business. Gareth stepped forward, his presence crushing. You were forcing her. She told you no, and you kept going. She's confused. Dane shot back, his voice rising. Confused because of you. You got into her head, made her think. She told you no. Gareth cut in, each word a blade. That doesn't mean confusion. It doesn't mean you get to insist. It means no. Since when do you care about this? Dane shouted, Real hurt breaking through. Since when do you care about anything besides the damned pack? Since when does Kessa matter this much to you? The silence that followed was heavy. Gareth didn't answer with words, but the look he gave Kessa, quick, vulnerable, said everything. And Dane saw it. Dane let out a humorless laugh. You feel something for her. He paused, staring at his cousin as if seeing him for the first time. That's ridiculous. She can't even shift. For the good of the pack, you shouldn't even want her. She's broken. The punch hit Dane before he could finish. It was sharp, violent, precise. It connected with his jaw hard enough to snap his head sideways. Hard enough to knock the breath from his lungs. Dane dropped to his knees, a hand flying to his face, blood spilling from his split lip. No, Gareth said, his voice deathly calm. You don't speak about her like that. You don't speak about her at all. You don't look at her. You don't go near her. Ever again. Dane spat blood onto the grass, lifting his eyes to meet his cousin's. Does she love you? He asked, his voice warped. Is that it? Did you finally find someone who looks at you without fear? Get up, Gareth ordered, ignoring the question. Why? Dane smiled. Bitter. Cruel. Going to hit me again. Hurt your own cousin over a girl who... I said get up. Dane obeyed, unsteady, wiping blood away with the back of his hand. For a moment, it looked like he might strike back. His muscles tensed, fists clenched. Don't make me fight you, Gareth said quietly. But the warning was real. You'll lose, and you'll get hurt far worse than you already are. You hit me, Dane said, still stunned. You hit your own cousin. For her. I hit you because you forced a woman who told you no, Gareth corrected. And I would do the same to anyone who did that. Even you. Especially you, who should know better. Dane stared at him, breathing hard, blood dripping from his chin. Then, because there was nothing left to say, because he had lost in every possible way, he turned. But before leaving, he looked at Kessa one last time. Say it, he asked, his voice rough. Say you love him. That you choose him. At least say something. Kessa remained silent. Dane let out a broken laugh and left the garden, trailing blood and shattered pride behind him. When his footsteps had completely faded, when only the wind in the trees remained, Gareth finally turned to Kessa. The anger had given way to pure concern. He approached slowly, as if afraid of startling her. Are you all right? His voice was rough, heavy. Did he hurt you? Kessa shook her head, but she was trembling. Not from the cold, but from shock. From everything. I tried to make him stop, but he wouldn't. I know, Gareth interrupted, pain in his voice. Pain for her, for what she had endured, for the fear he had seen in her eyes. I know, and I'm sorry. Sorry I didn't get there sooner. Sorry for... He stopped, running his hands over his face, and when he spoke again, his voice was broken. You're undoing me, Kessa. Every time something happens to you, every time I see you in danger, I can't think. I can't breathe. All I can feel is that I need to protect you, that I need to keep you safe, and I don't know what to call that anymore. I don't know how to pretend it's just responsibility. The words hung between them. Kessa looked at him, seeing the raw vulnerability, the unspoken admission of what he felt. And something inside her, something that had begun with the kiss in the corridor, grown in the garden conversation, exploded in the gorge rescue, collapsed completely. She stepped forward and pulled him to her. The kiss was different from all the others. It wasn't desperate like the gorge. It wasn't confused like the corridor. It was chosen, conscious, real. Kessa kissed him like someone who finally understands, like someone who finally chooses. Gareth tried to pull back, hands resting gently on her shoulders. Kessa, wait, he said against her lips. You're shaken. You're scared. I can't take advantage of that. I'm not confused, Kessa replied, holding his face, forcing him to meet her eyes. I like you, Gareth. I don't know when it started. Maybe it was always there and I was just looking in the wrong direction. But I like you. And I don't want you to push me away. Not again. Gareth searched her face for doubt, for hesitation. He found none. And then, finally, he gave in. The kiss deepened, urgent and intense. Hands tangling in hair, bodies pressing closer. It wasn't gentle. It was pure need. Months of restraint erupting all at once. When they finally pulled apart, both were breathless. Gareth rested his forehead against hers, eyes closed. This changes everything, he murmured. Chapter 5. The days that followed passed with a new kind of strangeness. Kessa and Gareth no longer hid. Not completely. They weren't obvious. They didn't make public displays. But they also didn't pull away when the eyes of the pack settled on them. And the pack noticed. They noticed the way the Warden searched for Kessa with his gaze during meals in the Great Hall. They noticed how she no longer looked away when she met his eyes. The murmurs began softly, then grew. The Warden and the girl without a wolf. Impossible. He had never looked at anyone before. She must have done something. Used something. But the whispers were no longer laced with open cruelty. Not after what had happened to Myra and the others. No one was foolish enough to challenge the Warden's protection. Kessa felt the stares, heard the hushed voices when she passed. But for the first time in her life, she did not shrink. Because when doubt began to creep in, when insecurity threatened to return, she remembered. She remembered the kiss in the garden. The way Gareth had looked at her afterward, raw, vulnerable, admitting without words what he felt. She remembered how he had struck his own cousin to protect her. How he had gone into the gorge without hesitation. How he had always been there, even when she had been too busy looking in the wrong direction. 5 days after the incident in the garden, Gareth found her alone. Kessa was in the small room where her mother worked, organizing old patrol records, when she heard the door open. She turned, expecting to see her mother returning. It was Gareth. He closed the door behind him, and the small space suddenly felt even smaller with his presence filling it. His dark hair was tied back loosely, a few strands escaping and falling across his face. He wore a simple tunic without his usual formal vest, and there was something different in his expression. Something nervous. Warden, Kessa began, but he shook his head. Gareth, he corrected softly. When we're alone, it's just Gareth. The name sounded far too intimate coming from his lips. Kessa nodded, feeling her heart quicken. He moved closer, stopping on the other side of the table that separated them, his hands resting on the aged wood. I need to talk to you, he said. You can, Kessa encouraged gently. Gareth drew a deep breath. The annual Moonrun gathering is in 3 days. Kessa nodded. She knew. Everyone did. It was the most important event of the year, when the entire pack gathered, when pairs were presented, when bonds were observed and judged. She had never gone. Women without a transformation rarely attended. And when they did, they remained in the shadows, serving, never participating. I want you to go, Gareth continued, holding her gaze. With me. As my mate. The world stopped. Kessa blinked, processing the words, trying to understand if she had heard him correctly. Your mate? Yes. Gareth walked around the table, closing the distance until he stood only a few steps away. I want you at my side. I want to run with you under the moon. His voice lowered at the end, heavy with restrained emotion. Kessa felt the air leave her lungs. Gareth, that's public. Everyone will see. Everyone will talk. They'll judge. Let them talk, he said, absolute certainty in his tone. Let them judge. I don't care. The only thing that matters is what you want. So tell me, do you want to go with me? Kessa looked at him, at the amber eyes fixed on her with a breath-stealing intensity. And the answer was so obvious she almost laughed. Yes, she said simply, honestly. I do. The relief that crossed Gareth's face was so pure it made her heart ache. He took the final step between them and cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs brushing her cheeks gently. Are you sure? He asked, giving her one last chance to retreat. Because once we walk into that gathering together, once I present you as my mate, there's no going back. The entire pack will know, and they will have opinions. They'll question it. Some will accept it, others will resist. It will be difficult. I know, Kessa said, covering his hands with hers. And even so, I want it. Gareth pulled her to him and kissed her. It wasn't urgent like the others. It was slow, deep, a promise. The 3 days passed in a blur. The night of the gathering arrived wrapped in mist and silver moonlight. The clearing outside the compound walls had been prepared. Torches cast golden light across the ancient stones marking the gathering circle. Long tables along the edges overflowed with food and drink, and the scent of roasted meat and wild herbs filled the air. The entire pack seemed to be there. Warriors, scouts, elders, healers, visitors from neighboring territories, all dressed in ceremonial leathers, drinking, talking, waiting for the Warden's arrival. Gareth came to fetch Kessa himself. He appeared at her quarters at dusk, wearing formal attire for the first time in a long while. Black leather vest with subtle silver clasps, dark trousers, tall boots. His hair was loose, falling over his shoulders, wild as ever yet somehow perfectly suited to the formality of everything else. He was devastatingly handsome. When Kessa opened the door and saw him there, her heart raced. I came to get you, he said simply, extending his hand. Kessa looked back at her mother, who stood behind her with eyes shining with contained emotion. The woman nodded encouragingly. You look beautiful, sweetheart. Kessa took a deep breath, smoothed the grey dress they had managed to borrow, and placed her hand in Gareth's. He gently guided her into the corridor, then stopped, looking at her as if seeing her for the first time. You are beautiful, he said, his voice rough. Kessa felt her cheeks warm. Not as much as the others will be. More, Gareth corrected, lifting her chin with one hand. Infinitely more. Because it's you. And he kissed her there in the corridor before they entered the gathering, a kiss that calmed her nerves and intensified everything at the same time. When they pulled apart, Gareth offered his arm. Ready? No, Kessa admitted honestly. But I'm going anyway. He smiled, a true, rare smile that transformed his entire face. Then let's go. They walked the corridors together, arm in arm. And when they reached the compound gates, when they stepped into the clearing where the pack had gathered, the sound of conversation was loud, chaotic, full of life. But the moment they appeared, the moment everyone saw who was entering, silence fell like a blade. The Warden, and Kessa at his side, his arm linked with hers, presented as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Conversations died. Heads turned. Hundreds of eyes settled on them at once. Kessa felt the weight, felt the judgment, felt the shock ripple through the gathering like a wave. But Gareth squeezed her arm lightly, a silent gesture of support, and she lifted her chin. They began descending the stone steps into the main clearing, and the crowd parted automatically, creating a path. No one spoke. They only watched, processing, trying to understand what they were seeing. The Warden had never brought anyone to the gathering. Never. In all the years since he had taken the mantle, he had always arrived alone, always refused companionship, always kept his distance. And now he was there with Kessa at his side, looking at her as if she were the only person in the pack. Myra stood near one of the torches, her face pale, her eyes wide with shock and envy. The other wolves watched with expressions that ranged from surprise to resentment. Dane stood on the opposite side of the clearing, and for the first time that night, he looked genuinely unsettled. But Gareth ignored them all. He guided Kessa to the center of the clearing where the ceremonial circle awaited, then turned to face her fully, releasing her arm only to take her hand between his. "Everyone is staring," Kessa whispered, feeling the burn of so many eyes. "Let them stare," Gareth replied softly, his gaze locked on hers. "Let them see. Let them know. You're here with me because I chose you, and I would choose you 1,000 times more." And then, before the silent, watching pack, he drew her into his arms. The traditional pairing stance, hands clasped, foreheads touching, breathing synchronized. And when he released her hand to cradle her face, when he leaned down to kiss her there in front of everyone, the pack knew. This wasn't political. This wasn't strategic. This was real. When the kiss ended, when silence began to settle over the clearing, Gareth did something no one expected. He stopped at the center of the circle, Kessa still in his arms, and turned to face the entire pack. The silence deepened. Absolute. Heavy. Kessa felt her stomach drop. What is he doing? Gareth released her waist but kept her hand firmly in his. Then he raised his voice, clear, steady, carrying an authority that allowed no challenge. "Many of you are wondering why I brought Kessa as my mate tonight," he began. And Kessa felt her face burn. She hadn't expected this. Hadn't expected a public declaration. "Some of you are judging, questioning my choice." He paused, his gaze sweeping the clearing, meeting the eyes of all who had doubted. "Let me make something clear," he continued, his voice lowering but losing none of its power. "Kessa is the strongest woman I know. Not because she has fought battles. Not because she has led patrols. But because she survived. She survived loss, cruelty, rejection, and still remained kind. Remained brave. Remained true." Kessa felt her eyes sting. She couldn't believe he was saying this. Here, in front of everyone. And tonight, Gareth turned to her, releasing her hand only to cradle her face between his palms. "Tonight, I want everyone to know that I choose her, that I claim her, if she will accept me." The entire clearing held its breath. Kessa looked at him, seeing the naked vulnerability in his eyes, the unspoken question. "Do you want this? Do you accept me?" Tears finally slipped free, trailing silently down her cheeks. "Yes," she whispered, her voice trembling but firm. "I accept." The relief that crossed Gareth's face was devastating. Then he leaned down and kissed her. There, in the center of the clearing, in front of the entire pack. A kiss that left no doubt. A kiss that declared, "She is mine, and I am hers." And anyone who has a problem with it can speak now. No one did. When they parted, Gareth held her gaze for one more second. Then, with a tenderness that contrasted sharply with everything before, he tilted his head and whispered, "This will hurt, but only for a moment. Do you trust me?" Kessa nodded, her heart pounding so loudly it almost hurt. "I trust you." Gareth brushed her copper hair aside, exposing the pale skin of her neck. He leaned in, his lips grazing lightly. And then he bit. The pain was sharp, immediate, like liquid fire racing through her veins. Kessa gasped, her hands clutching Gareth's shoulders, her entire body tensing. And then something changed. Something awakened. It was as if a door that had been locked her entire life finally burst open. Power exploded through her. Wild, uncontrollable, ancient. Kessa felt her bones shift, her skin burn, the world tilt at impossible angles. "No. What is happening to me?" But there was no stopping it. The transformation seized her with brutal force. Kessa collapsed to her knees, her dress tearing as her body changed, expanded, restructured. She heard screams around her, heard the clearing erupt into chaos. But it all felt distant, hazy, irrelevant. The pain was everything. The change was everything. And then, as suddenly as it had begun, it ended. Kessa was on all fours on the ground, but she was no longer Kessa. She was a wolf. Large, larger than she should have been for a first transformation. Her fur was a deep copper red like her hair, gleaming under the moonlight. Her eyes were the same gray, but now intense, wild, luminous. And the power radiating from her. The entire clearing recoiled. Even the most seasoned warriors, even visiting alphas, even Gareth himself took an instinctive step back, overwhelmed by the aura pulsing around her. That was when a voice rose. Ancient. Rough. Filled with wisdom. The pack elder, a woman with silver hair and eyes that had seen centuries, rose from her seat. She approached slowly, without fear, and stopped a few paces from the wolf Kessa had become. "The most gifted wolves awaken early," she said, her voice echoing through the silent clearing. But the most powerful take longer, because when they finally awaken, when they find purpose, connection, their presence is unmatched. She looked at Gareth, then at the wolf, and smiled. She was never broken, the elder continued. She was only waiting for the right moment to be seen. The elder bowed. Now she shows who she has always been. The wolf, Kessa, turned her head, her grey eyes meeting Gareth's. And he saw her there behind the wild form. Saw the recognition, the fear, the confusion. Gareth stepped forward slowly, ignoring the frightened protests around him, and knelt before her. "It's all right," he said softly, extending his hand. "It's me. You're safe." The wolf held his gaze for a long moment. Then slowly, she lowered her head and pressed it to his chest. Gareth wrapped his arms around her, clutching the thick fur at her neck, whispering words meant only for her. "You're incredible," he murmured. "You always were. And now everyone can see it." The return transformation took longer. Gareth guided her away from the clearing, away from prying eyes, into one of the private shelters. He covered her with his own cloak when she finally returned to human form, shaking, exhausted, overwhelmed. Kessa collapsed against him, tears finally coming. Not from sadness, but from relief. Exhaustion. From everything. I didn't know," she managed between sobs. "I never knew I could." "I know." Gareth held her firmly, warming her. "No one knew. But now they do. And they will never underestimate you again." Kessa lifted her gaze to meet his. "You always knew. That I could." "No," Gareth admitted, brushing damp hair from her face. "But I always knew you were strong. I always saw it. Even when you didn't. Even when no one else did. I saw it." The words broke something inside her. Kessa pulled him to her and kissed him, desperate, grateful, completely lost in him. And Gareth kissed her back, holding her as if she were the most precious thing in the world. Because she was. She always had been. When they returned to the clearing hours later, Kessa wearing clean clothes someone had provided, the gathering was still in progress. But everything had changed. People looked at her differently now. Not with disdain. Not with pity. But with respect. With admiration. With reverent awe. Myra stood in a corner, pale, defeated, finally understanding that she had lost in every possible way. Dane was near the edge of the clearing, watching. There was something in his expression, not anger, but acceptance, resignation. He met Kessa's eyes for a brief moment, then looked away. Maybe it had never been real for him. Just ego. Just vanity. And Gareth. Gareth stood beside Kessa, his hand firm at her back, guiding her once more to the center of the clearing. The music had started again, drums and flutes creating a primal rhythm. "Ready for another run?" he asked, a faint smile on his lips. "Always," Kessa replied. And they shifted together. Two wolves, one dark as midnight, scarred and powerful. One copper-red, gleaming and fierce. They ran through the forest as mates. As two souls who had found each other in the midst of chaos and chosen to stay. The pack watched, accepted, celebrated. And Kessa finally understood. She had never been broken. She had only been waiting to be seen. And Gareth, who had spent his entire life calling it duty, finally admitted the truth. It was love. It had always been love. The end.